series called Joy, the Flip Side of Justice. And it's based on the lectionary readings. And today, the readings are from the book of Isaiah and also from Luke's Gospel this morning, as we talk about the grapes of wrath this morning. So I invite you to turn to your Bible if you have one and hear these words from Isaiah, first of all, this morning, the 5th chapter, verses 1 through 7. I will sing for the one I love a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out a winepress as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Now you dwellers in Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done for my vineyard than I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I will tell you what I am going to do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I will break down its wall, and it will be trampled. I will make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated, and briars and thorns will grow there. I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the house of Israel and the men of Judah. They are the garden of his delight. And he looked for justice, but instead saw bloodshed, expected righteousness, but heard cries of distress. The word of God from the people of God, from the prophet Isaiah. Thanks be to God. And then hear this word from Luke's Gospel, the 12th chapter, verses 49 to 56. Jesus says, I have come to bring fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. But I have a baptism to undergo, and how distressed I am until it is completed. Do you think I came to bring peace on the earth? No, I tell you, but division. From now on there will be 5 in one family divided against each other, 3 against 2, 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. He said to the crowd, when you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately you say, it's going to rain. And it does. And when the south wind blows, you say, it's going to be hot. And it is. Hypocrites! You know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret this present time? The word of God through the gospel this morning. Thanks be to God. I know. It's a tough one today. Let's pray. Lord God, your word is powerful this morning. Your word is always powerful, but these words from Isaiah and from the Gospel of Luke stir us and frighten us, not a little bit. So Lord, calm our hearts as we hear and open this word this morning. Help us to understand the love song that you do sing to us. And Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. These words, like the words last week, are a little harsh. They're a little tough to make sense of this morning. I call this message the grapes of wrath, even though it's based on the series called The Flip Side of Justice. Because I see the words in this Isaiah passage this morning about the expectation that God had for righteousness and for grace and for justice, and instead he receives heartbreak and bloodshed and hears the cries of the needy. I see these words in Luke's Gospel where Jesus talks about bringing a sword to divide us instead of bringing peace that we expect from the Prince of Peace. And we could just kind of block our ears and block our hearts and say, we don't want to hear this. This isn't the Jesus we know. This isn't the God we know, threatening to destroy his beloved vineyard. This word from Isaiah is actually supposed to be a love song. Can you imagine a love song, really? It's a kind of a different love song. But from the Message Gospel, it says just that. It says, I'll sing a ballad to the one I love, a love ballad about his vineyard. This love song has a warning in it. A warning from a God who loves but chastens. Isaiah is telling the people who are in captivity, they have been displaced from their own place of inhabitants. They are now under the rule of an oppressive government who seeks to keep them oppressed. And Isaiah is telling them basically in this word that their captivity is basically a result of their moral condition as a society. The parable lays out how God the gardener has done everything possible to bring good grapes out of his vineyard. Every hole dug, every rock removed, every watering place made full, every seed carefully chosen, every precaution and protection and a hedge of protection, as we call it, literally secured and established. And what did he expect? He did expect something. He expected the people to behave as people of God. You see, we like to remember that grace is free, and it is free, but as we say, it's not cheap. And that there is an expectation when we are given the grace of God to exhibit it as well as inhabit it. Anger, God's righteous anger at his vineyard, which is the people of Israel in this passage, but it also can be us as we have been grafted in, right? We are grapes that have been grafted into the vine of the people of Israel. And so this word speaks to us as well. Do you get it? It says the vineyard of God of the angel armies is the country of Israel. All the men and women of Judah, they are the garden he was so proud of. Translate that and hear us, his church, as well, that he was so proud of, that we've been grafted in, and he's given us all of the protection and the planting and the cultivating and the harvest. He's been a tender gardener working to see that we are fruitful and faithful. And instead, it says he looked and expected a crop of justice and saw them murdering each other. He expected a harvest of righteousness and heard only the moans of the victims. God is angry in this love song. God is a jilted lover, and he's righteously angry. You know, C.S. Lewis said anger is the fluid that love bleeds when you cut it. God is angry. The wrath of God is a scary thing, and wrath is a scary word. We'd rather hear grace. I know I would. I'd rather hear love. I'd rather hear mercy. But God's justice cannot have the love and the grace without the justice. Amen? And so we know that, and yet we are scared of this word wrath. It's judgment. It's judgment, and we think about the final judgment, and we're scared, and righteously and rightfully so. God's justice encompasses wrath as well as grace. You know, it's funny that God is so amazing. I get a reading from C.S. Lewis every day, and the reading today was just so spot on. It points out how Christians tremble at the thought of Judgment Day, right? We're rightfully scared of that day when Jesus is coming back. We heard the story about the sheep and the goats in Matthew, right? We know that we don't want to be on that side. We don't want to be the goats go into eternal fire and damnation. But C.S. Lewis points out how surprised he was about how the Hebrew psalmists view the judgment day. They asked for it. Look at Psalm 35:24. It says, "Judge me, O Lord, my God, according to thy righteousness." They seek God's judgment. They look for that day. He says, because the ancient Hebrews like us, he said, they see God's justice and judgment in terms of an earthly court, just like we do. We kind of think of it a court system, right? We're gonna get pulled into court, and as Christians, we see ourselves on the stand. We see ourselves as the one on trial, and we are hoping for an acquittal. But he said the Hebrew psalmists, they see it as a civil case, with them as the plaintiff. They're the ones that are going after the unrighteousness, and they're hoping for a win, and a win with a lot of heavy damages awarded to them. See, we're worried we're gonna get judged and we're gonna get sent. And they look at it as saying, Lord, I've been following you, so I'm gonna stand up here and I'm gonna be in that court, in that judgment court, and I'm waiting for the righteousness to flow down, right? Like a stream, the justice. That's how we should be viewing it, because we know that God's justice is perfect. In Luke's gospel, Jesus is pretty clear, and it's a little bit scary. He says, I come to bring fire, and how I wish it was already burning, he said. Now, is that the fire of Pentecost? Is it the fire in our hearts? Is it the fire that lights us up and keeps burning in our hearts? Is it refining fire? Is it the fire that comes and burns out the chaff in our lives and gets rid of the fruitless branches? Or is it the fire of judgment, that fire that just raises everything to the ground? In calling this the grapes of wrath, of course I couldn't help but think of the Steinbeck novel and the movie. And so I bought the movie on Amazon yesterday and watched it. This movie from the 1940s. How many people have seen The Grapes of Wrath with Henry Fonda? Have you seen it in a while? It's been a while for me. It's a story about a family, a poor sharecropper farm family from Oklahoma, and the Dust Bowl era where things were just going down. The economy was terrible. The farms were failing. They were surviving poverty and starvation. There's not a lot of laughs in this movie, I'm just going to tell you that. If you do rent it or buy it or whatever, not a chuckle fest by any means. But these people were hard pressed. They were facing starvation, and they were being displaced from their homes and their farms. You know, it made me think of this thing that's going on now at the border, and this question that people ask, and they say, well, why would people bring their families, hundreds of miles through danger? That's an easy question to ask if we've never been displaced or faced starvation. These families were being kicked off their farms that they'd lived on and been born on and died on for years. And they were going to go to California because they heard there was work there. And so there was this mass exodus of people to go to California. And the Joad family, their son had been in prison because he'd been in a fight and killed a man in self-defense. And he'd been 4 years out of 7 years in jail. And he's out now, and he finds his way back to the family farm, but it's empty. And their family's gone. And he hears from this other man who's also been displaced, but who's gone a little crazy because of the stress. And he tells him the story about it. He tells him how they showed up with these big Caterpillar tractors that look like tanks in the movie, by the way. They just come to just destroy their homes and just raise everything to start over. Because the big business and the big money has found a new way to farm, and these people are not people anymore, and they're not important anymore. So they're going to just be displaced. This tank comes down to tear down this character, Yuli's home. And he's mad, and he's got a shotgun, and he's going to shoot at whoever's driving the tractor. And all of a sudden, the guy that's driving the tractor pulls off his mask, and it's his neighbor. And Yuli says, "What are you doing, man?" And he says, "Look, you can't shoot me. You can't be angry at me. I'm just doing my job. They're paying me $3 a day to do this, man. And don't be angry at the tenant manager, because he's got the bank on his tail, telling him that he's got to produce, or else they're going to take the land from him. And don't blame the bank manager," he says, because the bank manager is just getting his orders from the wealthy people that are invested, and they want their return. So it's, who do we blame all the way up the ladder and all the way down the ladder? It doesn't matter. The whole system is broken. The whole system is broken, and their neighbor, who's getting $3 a day to feed his family so they don't starve, is forced to tear down his neighbor's property. This time that we're in speaks to me so clearly of this message from Luke this morning, this idea that Jesus has come to bring division. It's not that he's saying, I'm forcing you to be divided, but he's just Jesus' presence in the world and Jesus' presence in our life causes us to divide because we have to decide, right, where we stand and how we're going to follow him. And we're doing that right now. We're trying to wrestle with how are we following Jesus, and we're not discussing it with one another, but we're disgusted with one another in the way that we see others doing it. And we get angry. Remember, C.S. Lewis said anger is the fluid that love bleeds when you cut it. We want justice. We want to be able to follow Jesus and see the fruit of what he is expecting of us. There's a great scene in the movie. The family, by the way, they've loaded up their truck like the Beverly Hillbillies, literally. There's like 10 of them on this truck. It's barely making it. And they're going all the way from Oklahoma. And at one point, they get to this desert gas station right on the edge of the desert. They're going to have to travel through just complete desert to get to California. And the gas station attendant says, man, are you guys crazy? You're gonna go there? You're taking that truck? That's not gonna make it. And they're like, it has to make it. And the two gas station attendants are watching them leave, and they're chewing gum, and they're saying, man, they're just not even human. Humans wouldn't do that. Humans wouldn't be so crazy. And as they go into this gas station diner, Pa Joe wants to buy a loaf of bread for Grandma who can't chew anymore. And the waitress is angry. They're looking at these people. They're Okies. That's what they call them. They're Okies. They're from Oklahoma. They're these poor, trailer trash Okies. They don't want to have anything to do with them because they're coming through and they're stealing their jobs. So there's this real attitude that these people have. And this waitress is kind of angry when he says, I want to buy a loaf of bread if we could for 10 cents. She goes, we don't have any 10. We don't have bread. We can't sell you bread. And then the owner says, you can sell us some bread. Well, it's 15 cents. It's not 10 cents. The owner says, give it to him for 10 cents. So she reluctantly wraps the bread and gives it to him. But you see something change in her. You see, suddenly she kind of starts to feel a little empathy for these people. She sees them as human and not just Okies. She sees them as a family who's been displaced and are distressed. And you can tell she starts to have a little compassion for them. And as they're leaving and she brings up their sale, the two children with Pa Joe, the niece and nephew, are looking at the candy. He says, is that penny candy? And she goes, well, no, it's not. And you think she's going to tell him. And she says, you know what? It's 2 for a penny. So she gives him the candy. And while she's doing that, these 2 truck drivers are sitting at the diner, and they're watching her the whole time. When the family leaves, they said to her, hey, that wasn't penny candy. You know those candies were a nickel apiece. She said, what's it to you? And then as they leave, they're paying their bill, and they start to walk out, and she goes, hey, you left your change here. And they said, hey, what's it to you? What's it to you? That example that people set when they're kind and gracious to other people, it made a huge difference to that family. It changed her. You can see it in her character. God expects something of us. He expects that when we are plump with grace, that we will ooze grace when we are pressed. I thought of those words from the Battle Hymn of the Republic, where we hear the term, the grapes of wrath, right? He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible Swiss sword. His judgment, his wine press is going to squeeze. What's going to come out of us when we're squeezed in that final wine press? Are we going to ooze grace because we've been plump and fat with it our whole lives? Are we watching other people in the church and seeing them example the grace of Jesus Christ? And are we learning from that? Or are we seeing that the harsh treatment of the people that treated these people in that movie and treated the people of Israel and treat each other as if they're less than? They're just Okies. They're just foreigners. They're not human. I hope and pray that we are being examples of fat, juicy, grace-filled grapes. Jesus accuses the crowd of being hypocrites and frauds because they are expected to be able to interpret what's going on and to choose the right path. We are too. In this troubled time right now, we are expected to choose the Jesus that we know and follow him in the midst of other voices telling us what's right and wrong. There's a choice. The signs of the times are here and we need to interpret them. I pray as we leave this place today that we can think about the grace that's coming out of us when we're pressed in life. Not just at the final judgment, but right now. I haven't always oozed grace when I've been pressed. But I pray to do better, and I pray for all of us. And I pray that we can be examples to each other as they were in that scene in that restaurant. That somehow the switch of empathy can be turned on in us, and we can start to see things maybe a little differently than we've been seeing them on the news every day. God expects something from us. He expects fruitfulness and good grapes. Let's pray. Lord God, we do pray that we can be the good grapes. You have given us everything we need. We have seen your example in your life. We have read your word, and we know what is expected. We know what you told us. And Lord, we are just having trouble putting our feet to our faith right now. Help us to see you clearly in the midst of all the noise and the screams and the yelling that's going on. And help us know for sure that when we come to that final wine press, that what comes out is going to be pleasing to God. Help us to help one another, to be fruitful. We pray in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.